Hello viewers and welcome to the Art with World. Today we have a very brilliant and multi-talented artist with us, ARIEB AZHAR. I'm sure most of you would be knowing him already. He is a singer, he is a musician, he is a playwright, he is a film producer and whatnot. How are you, ARIEB?
Very well, ARSHAD bhai. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming to our show.
It's my honor.
Okay. It's just cliche that people ask, how did you get interested in certain art form but I will ask you the same question, but I'll approach it differently. I would also like to talk about your illustrious father, Aslam Azhar Sahab. I have privileged to meet him few times. Once he came to a Galileo show to PNC Pindi. It was a theatre festival. He was not performing at that time. Mansoor Saeed Sahab was performing because he was reappointed as PTV chairman in
That's
first
right.
Benazir's time. So it was excellent to meet him. And your mother, of course, she is also linked with the world of theatre and art. So how was it growing up in the home which was full of art, literature, theatre and whatnot?
Well, I was born in 72 when my father was MD PTV.
Yeah.
And I spent the first 5 years of my life in Rawalpindi. That was a period when I think PTV was probably at its peak.
Yeah.
And a lot of folk musicians used to come to our house. So I grew up listening to some of our folk legends, such as Shaukat Ali, Reshma ji, Alam Lohar, Tufail Niazi.
Patani Khan maybe.
Patani Khan I never heard live,
Oh,
unfortunately.
okay.
Unfortunately. But with these people who I mentioned, you know, as a child I remember listening to them. And also, of course, back then PTV, which my father had was the leader of the founding team of PTV.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
And back then, PTV was like a family to us. And even later on in life, after we'd shifted to Karachi, when my father was removed during Zia's time. And even then, growing up, when I used to travel around Pakistan, my mother used to tell me, if you're in any city in Pakistan and you face any problems, you get lost, just land up at the closest PTV center. Because it's like a family.
Okay, yeah.
And that's how it was back then. Also, I think I consider myself very fortunate that because of both my parents being such Renaissance type of people, we were both, me and my brother and then my younger sister, we were brought up with excellent music, literature around us. Every evening used to end in discussions with my parents' friends, and we children used to be sitting around wide-eyed and listening to discussions on politics, history, music, art, aesthetics. So that was brilliant. We had a brilliant record collection where my parents had a record of Eastern classical, Western classical music, jazz music, Pakistani folk music. So yes, so I consider myself very fortunate growing up in that environment.
And that led you also, I mean, we can say that led you to your interest in music, art, theatre.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because I think that instilled in me a love for the arts and an aesthetical sense. Because aesthetics, I think, we're not totally born with. Some of it is inherent.
It has to be
But
refined.
a lot
yeah.
of it has to be, yes, refined, because otherwise what would the difference be between us and animals? So for example, if you see if a human child is reared, if his human child's upbringing happens amongst animals and not human beings, and there have been a couple of instances like this of feral children who've been brought up by wild beasts because they were abandoned and maybe some monkeys adopted them or wolves adopted them. Rudyard Kipling wrote a story, The Jungle Book, about this. Those children act like animals, and their whole sense of life is through an animal's eyes. So what differentiates us is culture. and that is that has to be well introduced.
Well, all these TV things you have reminded me of my childhood as well. We grew up watching this TV which your father was handling at that time, and still I have very fond memories of my past, the music, the plays, and intellectual discussions we had at TV.
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, that's still part of my nostalgia, I can say.
Because also, you know, back then there was no other television channel.
Oh, yes.
And PTV did not depend on its existence on advertisements. So PTV was free to produce whatever shows it wanted to produce.
Oh, yes.
And my father used to tell the producers, the PTV's early producers at that time, that look, we don't have a policy of censorship. Each of you yourself is a responsible human being who knows what is required in society and what is not.
Yeah.
So come up with programs that fulfill that criteria.
So that was early phase of your life, and
Yes.
then you landed up in Russia and then Croatia.
Well, before
Just
that,
briefly.
before that, when we shifted to Karachi, if I could, let me just
Okay,
also
please.
growing up in the same household. After my father was sacked in Karachi, he and a dear friend Mansoor Saeed,
Mansoor Saeed.
who's Sania Saeed,
Oh, yeah.
of our illustrious TV
Yeah, yeah.
actress,
Yeah.
her father. So Mansoor and my father then set up this theatre group called Dastak in Karachi, in which that's what you mentioned when you remember Galileo. That
Yeah.
was, of course, one of the
Yeah.
last productions of Dastak.
Yeah.
Galileo we did earlier in 1984, I think, and then in 85 or 86 again in Karachi. And that was a huge experience of my life, because that's when I got into music performance. My brother brought a guitar into the house. I kept at it, he gave it up, and I started singing any song that I used to like. We became quite actively involved in the resistance politics of the 80s in Karachi.
Yeah.
So then I used to sing a lot of revolutionary songs on my guitar and go to different demos and student meetings and workers, trade unions meetings, and used to perform revolutionary songs there. And of course the Dastak experience itself, which besides my father, nearly everyone who came into Dastak not only had not acted before in their lives, many of them hadn't even watched any theatre in their lives. But the passion and the dedication that they put into their work, many of them went on to become professionals in performing arts.
I remember it was a very famous theatre group, Dastak, at that time. I used to live in Multan, but we used to read a lot about this theatre group in newspapers. And I think most of the plays Dastak did were Brechtian plays. Galileo,
Yes,
I mean,
also.
most famous one. And its line when Galileo says to his student that curse is the nation who waits for the hero. It was a very famous dialogue.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Galileo's student, Andrea. And in the first production, I played the role of little Andrea when he's a child. And there's a scene when Galileo has to recant because he's been shown the instruments of torture by the state and the Catholic Church, who want him to take back his statements saying that the world goes around, the earth goes around the sun. And he recants, and his student Andrea is disgusted, and he says, "Bad naseeb hai wo sarzameen jahan hero janam nahi lete." That unfortunate is that land where heroes aren't born. And Galileo responds and he says, "Nahi Andrea, bad naseeb hai wo sarzameen jise hero ki zarurat hai." Unfortunate is that land which needs heroes. So yes.
Great. So let's just quickly shift to your next steps in life. Like you went to Russia and then Croatia. I would just like to hear from you, what was your experience? I think it was Glasnost, post-perestroika time?
During
time.
perestroika.
So briefly, if you could just tell what was the society like at that time, and then we'll also discuss what was the music scene in Croatia for you. I understand there is a lot to talk to you, but we'll briefly cover all these things.
Thank you, Arshad Bhai, for asking that question. I've been on many TV shows. This is the first time anyone has asked me about perestroika and glasnost. So perestroika and glasnost, as many of our viewers are aware, was the period in Soviet Union during Gorbachev's time, when they were opening up and liberalizing their economy, and also getting rid of a lot of draconian laws. I was 17 when I went, and I went to the Soviet Union to study, first because it was free and my parents couldn't afford to send me to some expensive university. And secondly, because we were all very left-minded, and we also looked up to the socialist system that the Soviet Union had built, and thought that this is a good future.
Paradise on earth, huh?
Well, yes. Back then, I was quite idealistic. So I went there in 1988, and they sent me, because of a bureaucratic error, they sent me to study Russian language in Minsk, which is the capital of Belarus. And in Minsk, there was no sign of perestroika or glasnost. It was still very, very old guard. So my experience over there was that there was a lot of frustration in society. There were, in the shops, if you went to the supermarkets, some things, for example, there was an abundance of, I'll never forget, of electric shavers. Wherever you went, there was an abundance of electric shavers. But to buy bread, you had to stand in line for 2 hours, because there was just a shortage of some very basic things. So there was a problem in their economy also at that time. But there was also a lot of resentment of people who felt that their democratic rights had been stifled for too long. But having said that, it wasn't all black and white. There were a lot of good things as well. For example, the fact that education was totally free, the healthcare system was totally free. Most families, besides the flat or the apartment they lived in, which was fairly basic, they also used to have some weekend house called a dacha, where they used to spend their summers and so on. So it was not black and white. And then I came back, because even that not black and white for me, I thought it was all white when I went. So I was disillusioned. And I said, no, this is not what we were struggling for. So I returned to Pakistan, and then we'd made some friends with this Yugoslav couple who used to work for Croatian television. And they told me, why don't you come to Zagreb, which is the capital of Croatia, which used to be one of the republics of Yugoslavia back then. So then in 1990, I went to study there in Yugoslavia. In 91, the war of the breakup of Yugoslavia started. Most foreign students left. I thought, I can't keep running away forever. I ran away from the Soviet Union. I can't run away from Yugoslavia, so I stayed on. And those of us who did stay on, we really became integrated into society. And then, so I saw the birth of Croatia, and I spent 13 years there.
Just tell us about social and cultural life of Croatia and the music scene of Croatia, which you also experienced. Rather, you contributed into that as well.
Yes. Well, my initial, of course, initiation into the cultural life of Croatia was as a student living in the student hostels. And when the war started, in our student hostels, the air raid siren used to go off about 5-6 times a day. But our student hostels didn't have a bomb shelter, and to get to the nearest bomb shelter was about a 10 minutes walk. So what we used to do was we used to gather on the ground floor of whoever we knew. And we would, all 20 of us would be huddled together in one room. You were supposed to have a total blackout because the Serbian planes were flying overhead. We had black papers and curtains on the windows, and a tiny little, maybe a candle burning underneath the bed or something. And there were militias outside who used to check if there's any light coming out from any window. They used to shout at you from down below. So we used to be in that place, and we couldn't, but we could make all the noise we wanted. So in that 15-20 of us, we had 2-3 guitars, and we used to sing songs together. And that was such a great bonding period. Everyone who's lived through that period, there's a special bonding that we have, because we've been through that wartime together. And that's where I learned all my earliest songs, Croatian, Bosnian, Serbian, Macedonian songs. When the war subsided, I started first performing on the streets. I started busking just to make some extra money, and then in cafes and pubs. And then after experimenting with a few bands, we made an Irish music band. There was an Irish person who we convinced to stay on in Croatia, Johnny Brennan, who was a fantastic Irish whistle player, which is their flute, the tin whistle. He was a brilliant tin whistle player. And then we started performing Irish music. I was the singer and the guitar player, and we had a fiddle, and we had the Irish frame drum, the boran. Later on, we turned it into an Irish folk punk type of band. And then for about 8 years, I performed with that band. And in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, that band, which was called the Shamrock Rovers, was quite popular in Zagreb. We really had a cult following, and we used to travel around and perform at festivals and venues, and it was lovely.
Can we just have a feel of it?
Okay, so this is actually it's a song by a Serbian singer-songwriter, Đorđe Balašević, who's perhaps more popular in Croatia than in Serbia. He was from Belgrade. He just passed away a couple of years ago during COVID. And this is one of his...
It's a folk?
No, it's a contemporary song, but very folk-sounding. Đorđe Balašević was inspired by Balkan folk music and by a lot of gypsy music. So this has, you can sense that. Ne pitaj me nikad više, zašto neve ne miriše, ne pitaj mi, to je priča duga. Ne pitaj mi tu pred svima, šta tu na dnu čaše ima, ne pitaj me nikad zašto cugam. Bolje da šešir nemam, pod njime đavo drema, s neba je zboljeva, đavo mi je kriv. Budi me u zlo doba, za njega red ne važi, on mora sve da proba, to đavo vino traži. Ja ne pijem što uživam, nič što mi dobro stoji, pijem da njega napojim.
Great, fantastic. So you had a good time in Croatia and you lived...
Oh, I had a wonderful time in Croatia.
Okay. And then you decided to come back, maybe after 13 years or so?
12 years. I decided to come back. It was, of course, it took me about 3 years for this decision of mine to crystallize. I was thinking about it because it was, of course, difficult for me to leave my band. But what made me decide in the end was two things. And first, of course, was that my parents were getting older, and I'm so glad that I came back and spent the last 10 years of my father's life with him and was there for him. And of course, I'm with my mother, and my younger sister is Down syndrome, so she's a special person, and she also requires full-time attention. So that was, of course, one major factor, since my elder brother had also shifted abroad. And the other factor was that, even though I was having great fun playing Irish music and Balkan songs, but I felt that I am not progressing as a musician. And I felt that my voice was becoming harder. And I feel that since I came back to Pakistan, and I came back and I started studying our folk traditions, and got some little bit of classical training. And I think that my understanding of music has so much more depth now than it used to. And even the old Irish and Croatian songs that I sing now, I think I sing much better after having gone through the Pakistani school of music.
So what difference did you find when you came from Croatia and Pakistan cultural scene, art scene, your own prospects, your own future aims?
Well, I spent 13 years abroad, and of course Pakistan had changed a lot in that time. And Well, does anything ever change? Well, even though I used to visit every year, but I wasn't connected. While I was abroad, a lot of these private channels had come into existence. The Indus music had come into existence. There was all these new pop stars. When I went abroad, there was only Nazia Hassan and Zohaib Hassan and Alamgir. But Shaky, of course, Muhammad Ali Shaky. But when I came back, like, there were all of these Janoon, Vital Signs, Strings, and all of these bands, and there was a whole scene. I came back and I was more interested in folk music than in pop music, so that wasn't really, I was glad to see it happening. But there was also quite, Islamabad, I think, used to be quite a wonderful city back then in 2000, and from 2003 all the way till 2007-8, when we had terrorism and so on. Yeah. But you remember the mood of Islamabad changed.
Yeah, so and then there was no so much concrete around.
Yes.
Roads were peaceful.
That's right,
there
it was
no
peaceful.
Extension of buildings and buildings.
Our common friend ARSHAD Bhatti had opened Civil Junction.
Yeah, I met you there many times with guitar. We used to perform there.
Yeah, and all our friends used to gather there, and there was just a chilled out, nice vibe. Yeah. And so I really enjoyed that period. And of course, I started spending time with a lot of folk musicians. I set up my own band. I got picked up by Coke Studio for season 2 and then season 3. I thought that it would be much easier for me to launch myself in the Pakistani music scene. But I discovered that no, it's a totally different scene over here than it was abroad. And that over here, unless you follow a very, very commercial line, which I was never, it's not in my bones to follow a commercial line.
I can understand. None of us had.
Yes. Or you maybe go towards India. Back then, of course, a lot of musicians from Pakistan used to travel to India. Now it's become much more difficult. It was not that easy, and there were not so many platforms for alternative musicians, for folk-sounding musicians. So then after, after being in Coke Studio and performing around Pakistan in the different, in the Rafi Peer World Performing Arts Festival several times and in different venues around Pakistan, I discovered that that was it. There was nothing more in the music industry unless you went into the commercial line. So then I got involved with friends in trying to set up platforms ourselves. And we did many things. We started a series of musical jams across Islamabad, which we used to call the Sweet Leaf City Jams, which was totally open for everyone. We used to put money from our own pocket. It was just sort of an open mic thing for musicians. We set up the Music Mela Festival with my friend Zija Fazli and I. With that still ongoing, even though I've left it now many years ago. Then I set up another festival called Art Langar, after having curated and co-produced Music Mela for 3 years. Back then I used to work with the Face Foundation in Islamabad, and through that we also produced this Indus music documentary, which with Jawad Ahmad, who directed it, him and I, we traveled.
Jawad Sharif.
Jawad Ahmad is, of course, also a friend, but he's a musician. Jawad Sharif, who's a brilliant director. We traveled across the length and breadth of our country, recording those musicians and makers of those musical instruments, which are now becoming extinct.
It was dying instruments.
Yes, on endangered musical instruments in Pakistan. So that was a great experience. And then, of course, I've done several projects with musicians and then performing abroad and sometimes taking them abroad. And so, yeah.
Okay. So it was a wonderful life. You lived here. You created your life again in Islamabad after Croatia.
Yes,
created an environment for you.
And not just Islamabad, also around, I spent 2 years in Karachi before COVID.
But we'll come to that. First, we would just
sure.
Let's just Islamabad
thing.
Let's finish it, because you have just mentioned that there were not many platforms available for folk music and singers. I can understand they were not, but if you think back then, like early years of Pakistan or around that time, there was a tradition of folk festivals, music
That's
nights
right.
like Anasan Bhatti, Bali Jatti, Alam Lohar, Tufail Niazi used to sing, and they used to pull a huge crowds for that.
Absolutely.
Things have changed, and they
Yes.
might be so. But there are many other things to talk with you on all these issues. But I'm just told that this is time for a short break.
Sure.
Right? We'll be right back now. Viewers, stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. So, ARIEB, we were talking about your musical events you did in Islamabad, and mostly you did Sufi poetry or Punjabi folk music. Tell us, I can understand that in your childhood you had heard all these great singers, but then you went totally to Western music, and then you again came back to this Punjabi folk music and poetry of great Punjabi poets. So you just tell me how it happened. And
you know, when I was living in Croatia, that's when I started reading about different religions in the world. I started reading whoever claimed to have any knowledge of any esoteric tradition, I would become interested. At that time, I was also in university. I was studying philosophy and Indology, which is India studies, which is the study of the subcontinent. So in a way, I was studying our own history and cultures, but it also gave me an opportunity to study Buddhism and the Vedas and Hinduism and Sikhism. And then I got interested in Sufism. And once I started reading up about Sufism, I suddenly realized that the music I'd grown up listening to was actually expressed this same philosophy. And that our folk music of Pakistan, unlike most folk music around the world, which also has, of course, stories connected to festivals and birth and marriage and death, and lovers parting, and but besides that, there is also a deep philosophy in our folk music, which uses these poetry of our Sufi poets. And as a friend of mine in Croatia put it, who himself is a great festival organizer in Croatia, he came to Pakistan to visit me twice. And when he heard this poetry here and I translated it for him, he said, your folk music tradition, it's like in Europe if we would start singing Nietzsche on our guitars. That's how much depth it has. So then I got interested in Punjabi Sufi poetry. And when I came back, then I started reading the poets themselves and started spending time with people who could tell me about it. And then I started composing some kalam of Bulle Shah and Khwaja Ghulam Farid. So yes, and I'm still interested in Sufi poetry very much.
don't you think that there were poets who were writing poetry in Punjabi language or maybe in Sindhi language, some other poets? Branding them as Sufi poet is something at least I can't understand. I mean,
I don't have an issue with the name Sufi poetry. I do have an issue with the Sufi music, because Sufi music is actually qawwali. Or in other traditions you also have any music which I think is soulful could be called Sufi music, and if it especially comes from a culture. But as far as calling these poets Sufi is concerned, no, most of them did belong to Sufi silsilas or orders. Baba Bulle Shah belonged to the Qadri order of Sufis. Bulle Shah also, Baba Farid, from whom this tradition starts, was of course the head of the Chishtiya order of his times, and from the line of Moinuddin Chishti. But to think that that as today For example, Sufi has become a very popular word in Pakistan. And for me, what brought me towards Sufi poetry was that in a very localized way, taking expressions from the soil, taking expressions from a mixture of cultures that happened in our part of the world. And the renaissance that came out of that in the form of Hazrat Amir Khusro and Indian North Indian classical music is a synthesis of Central Asian, Persian, Arabic roots together with Indian roots. And the poetry also expressed that, and it also has, while being very localized and very, very, connected with the soil and connected with the expressions of the soil, its message is universal. So if you translate it for someone, it can be appreciated by anyone around the world, just like Maulana Rumi, which is why Rumi is so appreciated around the world. And I think that our poets from Pakistan, whether they wrote in Punjabi or Saraiki or Sindhi or Pashto or Balochi or any other language, I don't think that they are any less than the great Maulana Rumi. The only difference is that Rumi has been translated into almost every language in the world. And we haven't even translated our own poets into Urdu and English. So if we don't accept the culture and the poetry of our land, how do we expect the world to understand it?
Would you sing it for us and our viewers?
Sure. So I'll sing
some Sufi poetry you have, which you like most.
Yes. So this is a kafi of Khaja Ghulam Farid.
And maybe you can just tell briefly about what it is about for...
Sure. So Khaja Ghulam Farid was a great poet from South Punjab. His shrine, his grave is at Kot Mithan. And he used to write in Saraiki mostly. He was just about 150 years ago. He belonged to the tail end of this tradition of the great Punjabi poets that started from Baba Farid and then came up to Khaja Ghulam Farid and Mian Muhammad Baksh maybe over here. And from
I'm a huge fan of Khaja Ghulam Farid.
Khaja Ghulam Farid is
great.
So in this kafi, which I discovered, a dear friend of mine, a French man, Julian, whose Urdu is better than mine, and who's published 5 or 6 novels in Urdu language.
And in Punjabi
as well. I was visiting him at his place in Islamabad when he used to live here. Now he's left. And he had this book of Khaja Ghulam Farid, and he showed me this kafi, and he said, look, no one's ever done this before. And as soon as I read it, what got me first was the inherent rhythm which was in it. And I liked that rhythm, and then I made a very simple melody for it. And then this song got picked up for Coke Studio Season 2, and then it probably has now become my most famous song. But the poetry says, "O beauty of truth, the eternal light, how shall I call you? How shall I call thee? Shall I call you chance? Shall I call you necessity? Or shall I call you Noah or the flood?" And what he does is he takes all the philosophical concepts about reality and God from the great traditions of the subcontinent, and he expresses them all. And in the end, he says, "Whatever I call you, I fall short, because you are truth without trace and name. So you can't be encapsulated in one single name." So. Sorry, I've forgot my plectrum, so I'm just going to use my...
Sorry for your fingers.
No, they're used to it. Hey, Husn Hakiki Noor Azal. Hey, Husn Hakiki Noor Azal, tenu wajib te imkaan kahun, tanu खालिक ज़ात कदीम कहूँ, तनु हादिस खल्क जहान कहूँ, तनु मुतलक महज वजूद कहूँ, तनु अलमिया आयान कहूँ, अरवा नफूस अकूल कहूँ, अशबा आन निहान कहूँ। तनु ऐन हकीकत माहियत तनु अर्ज सिफत ते शान कहूँ अनवा कहूँ औजा कहूँ अतवार कहूँ औजान कहूँ तनु अर्श कहूँ अफलाक कहूँ तनु नाज नईम जनान कहूँ तनु तत् जमाद नबात कहूँ हैवान कहूँ इंसान कहूँ तनु मस्जिद मंदर धैर कहूँ तनु पोथी ते कुरआन कहूँ तस्बीह कहूँ जुन्नार कहूँ तनु कुफ्र कहूँ ईमान कहूँ तनु बादल बरखा गाज कहूँ तनु बिजली ते बारान कहूँ तनु आब कहूँ तनु खाक कहूँ तनु बाद कहूँ नीरान कहूँ तनु दशरथ लिचमन राम कहूँ तनु सीता जी जानान कहूँ बलदेव जसूदानंद कहूँ तनु कृष्ण कन्हैया कान कहूँ तनु ब्रह्मा विष्णु गणेश कहूँ महादेव कहूँ भगवान कहूँ तनु गीत ग्रंथ ते भेद कहूँ तनु ज्ञान कहूँ अज्ञान कहूँ तनु आदम ते हवा शीस कहूँ तनु नूह कहूँ तूफान कहूँ तनु इब्राहिम खलील कहूँ तनु मूसा बिन इमरान कहूँ तनु हर दिलदार कहूँ तनु अहमद आली शान कहूँ तनु शाहिद मल्क हिजाज कहूँ तनु बायस कौन मकान कहूँ तनु नाज कहूँ अंदाज कहूँ तनु हूर परी गिलमान कहूँ तनु नोक कहूँ तनु टोक कहूँ तनु सुर्खी बीड़ा पान कहूँ तनु तबला ते तंबूर कहूँ तनु ढोलक सुर ते तान कहूँ तनु हुस्न ते हार सिंगार कहूँ तनु अशवा गमजा आन कहूँ तनु इश्क कहूँ तनु इल्म कहूँ तनु वहम यकीन गुमान कहूँ तनु हुस्न कवि इदराक कहूँ तनु ज़ौक़ कहूँ वजदान कहूँ तनु सकर कहूँ सकरान कहूँ तनु हैरत ते हैरान कहूँ तस्लीम कहूँ तलवीन कहूँ तमकीन कहूँ इरफान कहूँ तनु सुंबल सोसन सर्व कहूँ तनु नरगिस ना फरमान कहूँ तनु लाले अदाग ते बाग कहूँ गुलजार कहूँ बुस्तान कहूँ तनु खंजर तीर तुफंग कहूँ तनु बरछा बांग सनान कहूँ तनु तीर खिदंग कमान कहूँ सूफार कहूँ पीकान कहूँ बेरंग कहूँ बेमिसल कहूँ बेसूरत हर हर आन कहूँ सुब्बू कहूँ कुद्दूस कहूँ रहमान कहूँ सुब्हान कहूँ कर तौबा तुरत फरीद सदा हर शैनू पुर नुकसान कहूँ तनु पाक अलख बेऐब कहूँ तनु हक बेनाम निशान कहूँ तनु पाक अलख बेऐब कहूँ तनु हक बेनाम निशान कहूँ तनु पाक अलख बेऐब कहूँ तनु हक बेनाम निशान कहूँ तनु पाक अलख बेऐब कहूँ तनु हक बेनाम निशान कहूँ
I can imagine when you play in the public, you would have just
thank you.
Dancing. They would have been dancing to the tunes.
Thank you. And I'm fortunate to have a great group of musicians who I play with. So when we have the flute and the tabla and the lead guitar, and then it's like, yes.
I mean, music like this, they always need patronage because it cannot be, it cannot generate money on its own. Classical music, music like this, they need patronage.
Yeah.
So and if state does not patronize it, then who else has to do that?
Yeah. I mean, when Amir Khusro was patronized,
of course,
by the courts of the Delhi Sultanate, and
and all are great masters
Yeah.
of classical singing.
music.
They were always patronized.
Yes, and that's where the
and that
gharanas
provides them
developed.
time and peace.
Yeah.
They could work on their music. Yeah.
But
It was just a light discussion on a lighter note.
I'm loving this conversation. But on the other hand, you had musicians who would not even cross this line. For example, Pathan Khan.
Yeah.
So you had instances of musicians who were uncompromising in their truth of music.
I would like to hear from you your experience of making this documentary film, Indus Blues. And then I would also like to hear from you about your future projects. You are writing a book on Pakistani music.
I am.
You are doing vlogs. And you have, of course, you have done a play as well, which was played in Napa. It was River's Daughter.
Yes.
And you had taken main idea from Umar Marvi.
Well, I just took the characters of Umar Marvi. So I wrote this play last year. 2 years ago, started writing, finished it last year. And we did it as part of a grant that we got from the British Council, and which was called Gender Ecologies. And I thought that the story I'm writing actually fits into that. So we pitched it and got some funding from there, and then made up for the shortfall through other avenues. And the play, in my play, it's based on the famous characters from Sindhi folklore, Umar and Marvi, in which Umar is a powerful king who kidnaps Marvi, who's a village woman, because he falls in love with her. But no matter what he promises her, she says, dearer than all your wealth and palace and your gold is my earth and my soil and my village and my river. So I took that metaphor of Marvi representing the soil and Marvi representing local culture and permaculture, and Umar representing capitalism. So in my play, Umar is the head of this real estate company who's got this who's developing a portion next to the Indus River from where Marvi belongs.
Who has transformed Pakistan into just real estate.
Yes.
Nothing else is left.
So Umar, and of course they want these villagers out so that they can build their housing project. And Marvi says, no, we won't leave. We belong to this land. And then there's this local landlord called Peer Tota Sai. I played the role of Peer Tota Sai. I loved playing that role. And of course I'd written it myself. But while writing it, I wasn't thinking that I'd play it. And Peer Tota Sai has got his own interests. And the investment behind the real estate company is coming in from the indispensable corporation, the Bandobast Corporation, we called it in Urdu. So they are the stakeholders. So all these forces on one side and Marvi representing the earth on the other. And then I won't tell you how it develops, but it's a great, I'm really happy with it. And of course, a lot of time was spent in developing the script while we were, because I'd written the script originally in English. Then a friend translated it. And when I took it to Napa, then Kulsum Aftab, the director from Napa, took it up, and during the course of the rehearsals, we developed the script, and so it was a lovely experience.
So you played the villainous role, right? Who was Marvi in that film, in that drama?
Yes, so it was a big challenge to find a woman who could play the role of Marvi, and we were really lucky to get Amna Ilyas.
Oh, great!
Who's and it was her first theatre experience. Amna Ilyas, of course, comes from a background of television and modelling and film, but she'd never done theatre. And when Kulsum, the director, and we went to interview her, we were sold. And so she brilliantly did the role of Marvi. And for the lead role of Umar, we got Fawad Khan, not the film actor, but the theatre actor, who also teaches at Napa and the Arts Council, a brilliant theatre actor. So we got Fawad Khan to play that. And when we did the play in Hyderabad, unfortunately, Fawad couldn't be available for us, so then we had Fahim Azam playing the role of Umar, and he learnt the whole part in like 4 days. And there was a lot of improvisation going on stage when he was forgetting lines and the rest of us were making up for it. And that's the charm of theatre.
Yeah. So how was its reception? What was people's response when they watched it?
We had full houses. We played for, 1 week or I'm forgetting. I think it played for 1 week, yes,
Great.
at Napa. And we had a full house every night.
Right.
And in the last 3-4 shows, it was people were sitting on the steps, people were standing outside. We had to turn some people away. And then afterwards, we got called by the Department of Agriculture of the Sindh government to come and perform the play, to do the play in Hyderabad. So we then went there and did 3 shows in Hyderabad. Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And are you taking it to other cities as well? And,
Well, you know, putting together a play, because I was also producing it, so which means I had to find the resources we needed, and it's really takes a lot to find sponsorships and to find funding for, again, projects that are not totally commercial.
yeah.
You know, and we also integrated some folk musicians into our play from Sindh, who who represented the folk culture. So yeah, so that it was brilliant getting back into theatre after my experiences as a teenager growing up in Dastak group. I'd like to bring it to Islamabad and Lahore, but let's see when I have the time and the mental capacity to start fundraising for it.
Okay. And some words about Indus Blues.
So Indus Blues, Jawad Sharif, the director, it was his idea to make a film on the dying musical instruments of Pakistan. And when he approached me, then when I was working for the FACE Foundation, we put a project together, applied for funding, received funding, and then produced this documentary. So Jawad and I and Jawad's team, we traveled across Pakistan. I had done my homework in identifying which musicians we need to go and meet. And our biggest difficulty was in cutting it all down and, deciding which musicians not to go and interview for this particular project. So we decided only to focus on those instruments which are melodic instruments. We left all the percussion instruments out because that would have opened up a whole new universe. So we covered instruments like the sarinda from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, and we found that there's one master of the sarinda left, Ijaz Sarhadi, the son of Munir Sarhadi, who was also a great folk musician. And now he's taught his son also, but his son performs this with the saxophone. That's where he earns his bread and butter from. And there's no more sarinda instrument makers left in our country. So we covered that. We covered the Balochi banjo, we covered the saroz in Balochistan, and the alghoza and the burindo in Sindh, and the murli bean, the snake charmer's bean. So it was a great experience.
Yeah.
When we set out to make this film, we thought we were going to make a happy film about celebrating our folk
But it
culture.
turned out to be sad, I think.
It turned out to be a little sad
experience
because wherever we went, the
Yeah.
musicians, except for Gilgit-Baltistan, where there has been a revival of folk music, and except for the rabab instrument in KP, which has also seen a revival, everywhere else we saw stories of people who were complaining, and people who were saying that we can't, it's difficult for us to make a living, and we don't get support, and we don't have platforms, and we don't have funding, and because folk music and classical music across the world, you can't let it loose to the forces of the market.
Of course you
It
can't.
needs state or
Yeah.
some patronage,
Support, yes. Yeah.
Even in the West,
Yeah.
if you were to let opera and ballet to compete with pop music,
No,
it would be wiped out.
Yeah.
You need to, so over here, there's not enough of funds which are available for this sort of music. And that's why we named the film, I came up with the name Indus Blues, because it was a
Indus and blues.
blues, yeah, it was a
Sadness.
blues story, yeah.
Yeah. So we are just, I'm told there's just 1 minute left for us.
Oh,
But I would like to hear from you about your upcoming book. After all this, you
Sure.
are becoming an author as well now.
well, after writing The River's Daughter, I got, and before that I used to write some articles for Dawn. By the way, the Indus Blues is available on YouTube. Please go and watch it. And some of my articles are also available from which I wrote for Dawn. So right now I'm doing a book called The Beloved's Call, or at least that's the working title. And it's about the music of Pakistan. So the regional music, a historical overview, the instruments, the poetries around which it's developed. And we're traveling across Pakistan with my team. We're interviewing musicians and historians. We've been to Gilgit-Baltistan, and we've started going to KP. And we're also putting out the research work in the form of vlogs, and at the end the whole thing will come out as a book. And I'm doing a series of lectures across the country about the importance and the role of culture.
Oh, great. ARIEB, there are so many things to talk about, and I think all the topics we touched upon needed a separate discussion, specifically focused.
Well, we can meet outside the studio also.
No, but I think I'll request PTV to arrange more shows like this, and I'll have more discussions with you.
Absolutely.
But this is time to close this show. Thank you very much for coming to this program, being with us, and talking such lively things with us.
Thank you so much, ARSHAD. Thank you so much.
So viewers, thank you for watching this program. See you next Sunday, same time.